So once you have sort of your centerpiece of the computer, laptop, tablet, whatever it might be, we are looking at our DAWs, our digital audio workstation. And these are the programs that we're going to be using that typically we record to, edit with, process sound within, really kind of can build and arrange our track within. So typical, or rather classic examples might be like GarageBand, which is free and comes with all Mac products. Cakewalk, which is an excellent DAW for PC, also free, and Reaper, which is another one free, Mac and PC. I know there is a Linux one out there as well, but again, with these DAWs, a number of them are free or sort of a pay what you will price, which is
Yeah.
fantastic.
Or free versions, even like Pro Tools and Studio One, like have limited free versions and things like that.
Right, which is great because you can kind of learn any of them and figure out what's comfortable for you too.
Yeah.
Some are more intuitive than others, or I mean, we all have different learning styles, right? So some might be more intuitive to some people than others.
Yeah, and there's lots of information out there about, I like to make this style of music, or I like to make this style of music, which DAW is best for me. So you can do some Googling if you have very specific needs, because, people have opinions everywhere, all over. We'll just share the screen real quick. All right, so we're just going to show you, I'm assuming a lot of music therapists probably already have seen a DAW before, but we got two tracks here. Chris and Jesse both shred. What you do is you can add MIDI instruments. We're going to talk about that in a minute. You can record anything that you would record, a guitar, a keyboard, a microphone can all go in there. You can use, GarageBand has a feature that they have their own amps, so you don't even have to have an amplifier. And then they have drums that you can program. They have drums that like follow the groove of your song and different stuff like that. So you can add a track basically. GarageBand comes stocked and loaded with, bass, drum kit, electric drum kit, guitars, even, marimbas and orchestral instruments, as well as, traditional organs, get your Stevie Wonder vibes going on and different stuff like that. So basically, you just hit record, you make sure everything's plugged in at a good level, and you can layer stuff in. You can layer in vocals, do whatever. There is a little bit of information coming out later about editing and stuff like that. That's definitely beyond the scope of this video, but just to show you some basic things. So you just add tracks, and you can set the tempo, you can set the key signature and time signature, and kind of go from there.
Awesome.
You need headphones.
You need headphones.
You need headphones. You can even get cheap ones with this is not an expensive one. I think these are like $25. They're the Samson HP30s. But even for $100, you can get professional level. Like the Sony MDR 7506 is like, people record and mix with those like professionals, and that's $99. Yeah. So yeah, definitely, have some of those earbuds. It doesn't hurt to have them, but it wouldn't hurt to get something that goes over your ear, because those are a little bit better.
I'm a fan of the over ear. I think that they're, first of all, they kind of give that sort of studio feel, which is really nice. And I think they're a bit more sanitary and in that sense too.
Yeah.
You
can put covers on a lot of them. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Something I like to think about a lot too, as far as, of course, we want to be able to get a nice playback, but I like to think about how do people listen to music a lot, right? And there's kind of this kind of joke about if you're mixing something, you take it into your car and listen to it in your car, right? Or listen to it on your cell phone, because that's where most people are listening to music, right?
Not $2,000 speakers.
Right. Exactly. So yeah. I really do think, go for comfortable headphones, right? Go for ones that you're used to.
And that'll help you, like we mentioned later, you can work on that anywhere. You could be in the days of us going to coffee shops. You could be in a coffee shop. You could be, in a common area of wherever you work or things like that. So um, I would say super helpful for that. Lastly, as someone who is like already has tinnitus in one ear, I definitely would say, watch the volume that you're listening into your headphones. Do as low as you can. And then same thing. That's why I don't like the earbuds, because they're a lot closer to your eardrum and punching your ears in a way that they didn't expect that they would get music at them. Cool. Let's hop onto that MIDI keyboard. I'll
Right.
do the show and tell while you tell us about it.
That sounds great. So the MIDI controller, nice, is a essentially a controller. It's often looking in the format of a piano, but also, like we can see with Chris's there, has some pads as well for triggering different sounds.
Yeah.
And yeah, nice.
So those you can play. Yeah, you can trigger whatever. It could be a drum set. You could do something like that. It's got all kinds of knobs to change, all kinds of parameters that you can set. And it connects USB.
Yes. And so this is, the main takeaway word for me with this is controller, right? It does not tend to do anything on its own. Some come with software, but most don't do anything on their own, right? You are using this to take all of the sounds accessible in your DAW or in your third-party plugins that you might be using, and really control them like you would with a standard instrument. And so nice things to look into when you're considering MIDI controllers might be like touch sensitivity if you're really trying to get that real instrument feel. Same with the drum pads or the drum style pads. Some of them have more touch sensitivity, pitch wheels, things like that that might make it feel more like a synthesizer, that type of thing. But
yeah,
it's I don't know how to say this. I think you could spend the least on this piece of equipment. In my
they make them really cheap. I got mine. It's the Mark One, the original version of the Arturia Mini Lab. I got it on Reverb, used for $60. And what's cool is it comes with a whole suite of instruments called Analog Lab. And I was worried I wasn't going to get it, but I literally just emailed Arturia and said, hey, I bought this. Here's the serial number. How do I access that? And they sent me the info. So there's 3,000 classic synthesizer voices and stuff, like all the ones you've ever dreamed of. So that was $65, and it's small. If you're a pianist and you want a big one, you can get one that's like the size of a piano. But if you're not a pianist, you don't need to worry about getting a big one if you're just going to program left and right hand separately and things like that.
And I think it's a huge thing to think about too, in terms of like the mobility of your setup, right?
Yeah, it all fits in a backpack for me.
Some of them even come with a nice little carrying case or something like that. So.
Yeah. Cool. Well, you'll need something to capture that sound with, like the things we're talking into.
Hello. So, the MIDI controller, right? We're talking about this idea of working within the digital space, right? Working within the DAW, using these software instruments. But of course, we want to integrate, or we might want to integrate acoustic as well, and that's where the microphone comes in. So, microphone, as most of us know, captures sound, turns it into signal, and then we can work with it within the DAW from there, kind of edit it, cut it up, manipulate it, etc.
Yeah.
There are different types of microphones. Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say, even the cheapest mics will be better than the mic on your computer. So these are all of the ones you see in front of you are less than $100. This is a condenser. I'm turning it away from me. So all these condensers, he talks about phantom power. So that's just a button you have to press on usually your interface. We'll talk about that in a minute. So those get, a certain sound. And then these are like the two most famous microphones ever, an SM57 and an SM58, which they're the same microphone in a different house. So these are like what people have recorded guitars on, like millions of guitars and millions of vocals and drums and everything else. And you've probably sang into something like this before. So these are can be found way under $100 used, uh, and there's a lot of copycat versions. But these are the Shure SM57 and SM58, and this is a Lyx LYX condenser. It's just like a cheap clone brand, and
Yeah,
it works great. Sounds great. Looks fancier than it is. It's gold.
it looks really cool.
I know. It was like $70.
Nice. So yeah,
Uh,
exactly. I think that things to consider with this right there, these different styles of microphones, and Chris is just kind of laying out how we might use them in different settings, but these tend to be a little bit more geared towards picking up sort of more sensitive or intimate type sounds and spaces. So again, we're speaking relatively close to them. We have them set in a way that they're picking up our voice, but they're not picking up too much else in the room, right? Whereas those other microphones that Chris showed, they might be used to pick up a drum kit. They might be used to pick up a really loud guitar amplifier, right? And
mm,
they're meant to kind of handle that punch a little more. So we
mm.
usually see them more in live settings. Um, in my opinion, I think if you had to start with one, a dynamic mic is probably um, a nice way to start because I think it is a little bit more flexible and kind of rides the line between the live and the recorded setting a little bit better.
Yeah. Or just a USB mic if you want to skip the whole idea of an interface.
Hmm.
Those are pretty popular. I mean, they're hard to get right now, I think. The world is running out of them because of coronavirus.
I
Like
didn't know
places are
this.
running out of stock. So I'm sure you can still get them, but they're fewer and farther between than they were before March. Because everybody's suddenly Zooming from home. Um, yeah, yeah, I think that's great. And if you don't get a USB uh, mic, you will probably need an interface. So I'm
Yes,
going to try and do show and tell while you tell them about interfaces.
sounds good. So the audio interface, nice, is looking good. The audio
That's
interface,
we have it on the list. It's the PreSonus Audio Box
oh, awesome,
USB. So
awesome,
standard, I think it's like $100.
perfect. And we'll get back into the audio interface in a sec, but I was just thinking as you were talking about the pricing for things, you keep mentioning Reverb. Reverb is a really nice buy and sell site for
Yes.
gear, both used and new. The one thing that I would like to mention is you might want to check in with your facility as far as um, being able to use budget on used gear. For some that works, for others it doesn't. I've often had to go the buying new route, which is you're unfortunately spending a little bit more, but it's maybe easier to get that budget approved. So just something to
Yeah.
consider.
Or maybe like if you can find out a way for you to get reimbursed, maybe that could be a loophole around that. But otherwise, yeah, usually a place is going to tell you not to use that kind of a, because it's almost like a Etsy marketplace. I mean, Etsy owns them now, so it's people, individual sellers selling their items. Like I've sold and bought many things off of Reverb. So
Mhm.
Sweetwater is obviously a solid place. With They have great customer support. If you don't know what you need, they can help you a ton. So Sweetwater would be a great place to get things if you have to buy everything new.
Yes. And I think that we are aiming to make ourselves available
Mm-hmm.
through this Technook to also be a resource to help kind of figure out what is it that I need, within a certain budget, perhaps what do I need to get started, or going all the way to the level of like, hey, I'm trying to build up this kind of serious clinical project here, and how can I make this
Yeah,
um, work for these needs?
totally.
So taking us back to audio interface, which we were just looking at, this is we're going to think of this as kind of like the hub of our recording setup. Um, this is where our microphone will plug into. This is where often a live instrument, such as like a guitar, might be able to plug directly into. Um, where we're going to control often our headphone audio, even our headphone level rather.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on in there. It also typically might have like phantom power, which we might need to power a microphone such as this. So it really holds like a nice central place in organizing and facilitating our recording setup. And I think the main thing that I like to think about as far as when I'm looking for these is the number of inputs that I might need for whatever it is I'm doing.
Hmm.
They start at a single input interface, right? Which means I can record one track at one time. But we can take that all the way up to, well, actually, I don't know how high they go up to, but within a decent price range, you can get like probably a four input interface, and that
Yeah.
would enable you to record a guitar and sing at the same time, or have two different mics picking up different angles of the same signal or something like
Yeah.
that. Hmm.
Outside of a mixing console, I think you can get up to like 16, but that's like professional level stuff, and that's going to be over $1,000 usually. So I don't think anybody will want to start there
No.
brand new unless you're just suddenly miking up drum kits.
Yes.
Um, yeah, I would say nowadays too, there are so many good cheap ones. Like all the technology is kind of met up in a way that like for 1 to 2 inputs, you don't need to be spending all that much money. So the audio box, the Scarletts, the Focusrites,
Hmm.
those are all great like starter ones. There's some other ones. Behringer makes some. Behringer's like the king of cheap gear.
Yeah.
Um,
I think the
so
Motu is one we have on the list, which I've heard some really great stuff about, and all of
yeah,
those are I think under $200 new.
and for starting, like those will do all the things you need them to do. Are there things that you'll grow out of eventually? Probably, but I still have my 2 input audio box USB, and it'll be a while until I upgrade. I'm looking at the UAD um, Apollo, but that's going to be a while because I want to wait till I can get the nice one with the quad core, and
Hmm.
it's over $1,000. So you got to wait a while.
So I'm using
Um,
the Arrow myself, which is sort of like
yeah,
their smallest version.
yeah, the in
Um,
between.
yeah, yeah, and it's the thing I'll say that's nice about it to consider is it has the ability to do like digital signal processing on
Yes,
the interface. So what's nice about that is it sort of takes the load off of your computer a little bit.
for sure.
You could be running sort of a lighter weight,
Yeah,
computer, and do more processing on that end.
if you are doing more intense effects laden music,
Yes.
but your computer is, a 2011 MacBook, you might want to consider something like the Arrow would be a great entry, kind of mid-level entry. Um, so yeah, cool. And you'll have to connect all that stuff. And the
Yes,
main
indeed.
two, we won't need to spend a ton of info on this. You'll need instrument cables, 1/4 inch cables. Those are the same on either end usually. Or you'll need XLRs, which have the male and the female ends. Those connect to like microphones usually.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, that's about all I'd say on that. I mean, the
yeah,
main thing I like to think about as far as music therapy, kind of like mobile studio setup is concerned, is uh, and I've learned this the hard way, is think about the length of your cables.
mm,
I've said, oh, you know what, give me something more than I need, because I never know when I'm going to need it, and then I'm kind of trailing cable. They're all getting tangled, and I spend half the time getting them detangled. That's like they always somehow
yeah,
tangle themselves if you have enough room for them too, right?
yeah.
So
I mean, I've been pretty happy at home. I've got several. Like, what is this? I don't know, 4 foot
yeah.
something, 3 foot mic cables. They're great for at home because it's that same reason they don't get in the way. But I have a couple of longer ones if I need them for, using regular long, playing a gig or whatever.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah.
So
Uh,
that's about it for the cables. I just think this is where you might have to do a little bit of your homework. The thing is most of the hardware we're talking about doesn't come with cables. Unfortunately, it might come
um,
with a power supply, or it usually comes with a power supply, but it doesn't usually come with the cables
yeah.
to connect it to
I
it.
will give a shout out. If you want like a super high fidelity cable, if you're like somehow if you're an audio nerd, my friends over at Caulfield Cables make these super pretty cables that are like high fidelity, low capacitance. That means your signal is the clearest it can be. Because one thing to consider when you start, like we're doing another video on guitar pedals, when
Mhm.
you start adding lots and lots of length of cable, the sound gets degraded. This is something you probably won't care about as a beginner, but as it goes along, you'll realize like, oh, that's affecting what I'm doing. So check out them. Their stuff's really cool. Caulfield Cables.
It's really pretty too. I like that. I like that cable.
Yeah, they're awesome. They're a little small. Nothing of here is sponsored, but I've worked with them with my podcast, so I just thought they're cool and I'd shout them out.
Nice. And I feel like
Uh,
while we're doing that, I just want to say really quickly, I have this guy hooked up, so it's a little hard to see, but
oh, coily cable.
got this coily cable, and I
They're
just
fun.
yeah, I think that's what I wanted to mention as you were talking about it. Is like you can have fun with this stuff, it's
They're very Jimi Hendrix.
yes, yeah, this feels all very techy, but at the same time, like I have fun with it. Uh,
Yeah,
so
that's
I
good.
think my
And the
mic's
coily
working,
cables,
it's yeah,
yeah, the coily cables. Now, the same thing. You might want to use a coily cable because it adds length and it kind of cuts the highs out of your sound a little bit. Like you might want that. Plus, the coily cables, naturally coil up and do their thing, and you don't have to worry about wrapping cables as much. It's
exactly.
cool. Other thing that's pretty straightforward: microphone stands. I've got this short little desk stand that I bought. You probably at least want one boom stand and maybe one desktop stand. But if you've got one boom stand, you can do a lot. You know,
Yeah, yeah, they're incredibly, I think they're great for like client accessibility, as
yeah,
far as like maybe being a mic that you might be able to use with someone who's
yeah,
bedbound, for example, or um, just needs some sort of like intentional positionality of the mic.
yep.
Um, and
Yeah, and
then,
those are called boom because they're the ones that you can adjust at the middle, and you can basically they can either be straight or they can be any form of like an L. They can move around in whatever direction. Um, we have them. They're just a little big to fit on the screen while we're talking into them.
yes,
But
and
yeah, they're
you
good.
look like
Yeah,
a movie crew coming through, but
yeah, exactly. But they're cheap. I think you can get them for about $20, brand new, a cheap one. Pop filters, we don't have them right now, but you're going to hear it, the B and the P sound. So if you have that little pop filter, it blocks a little bit of the air, disperses that, and you won't have those B's and P's, those plosive sounds coming through. Um, you can literally like put pantyhose on a wire hanger though. Like you can find ways to get around it if you're trying to be super cheap. That just keep in mind, like your client's going to go, what the world is going on right now? Like, what am I singing into? So keep that in mind.
but at the same time, it's also it's a nice way of, I think, making them accessible as well. I mean, maybe not the pantyhose, but I know that there are some DIY methods to keeping a mic um, clean or reusable for a patient who
That's
might
true.
not be able to use it otherwise. So
Yeah.
that's something
And I
that
know people have even like put Ziploc
block.
bags like over it, and then you can, just wipe it off.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah. Cool. Well, the last couple of things we definitely did in order of like need. So kind of take us through these last things here.
Sure. So the last couple things, which I would put these more in the category of like I'm trying to build a studio type environment, are monitors and room treatment. So monitors are if you're not listening back through headphones or you're not doing like a headphone split with whomever you're working with, it's a nice way to hear the sound in the room, right? So monitors they're essentially speakers, but they're really meant to give you a nice stereo image. If you're doing like cool panning and stuff like that in your music, they're meant to give you sort of a flat response, so that if you're working on maybe like EDM or something that's like super bass driven, that you can get a kind of accurate representation of how bassy
Yep.
that is before you hear it in a more distorted way. Um, and these are, yeah, these I think also add to kind of the cool feel, the cool factor, if you will,
It
of
definitely feels official,
it
even
feels,
if you had cheap monitors, you know.
yeah,
One thing I would say monitor wise is like you might think, oh, I need 5, 6, 7, 8 inch monitors because that's what professionals are using. But
Hmm.
if you are in a small space, you do not need large monitors. Like PreSonus makes for $100, you can get the pair of 3.5 inch monitors, which it's super small. So basically, that's why your computer speaker doesn't sound great, right? It's a small speaker, but so it's a small speaker. It's 3.5 inches, but it's super loud. And the problem is when you get these, the bigger speaker you get, the louder it's going to be. So if you're at home or you're at your work office or whatever, you might not want a 5, 6, 7, 8 inch speaker
Hmm.
because it might be too loud. So, those are good, and you could maybe get a bass. You could save the money, get that, and get a bass subwoofer to go with it, and then
Sure.
you get the best of both worlds. You could have it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's if you're building it out for
Right.
sure.
I've also, I'll be honest, I've used my like computer speakers that I buy as sort of
Yeah,
monitory type things, right? And it works.
that's what I have at work. It's
Hmm.
just simple, and I don't
Excellent.
even have nice monitors here at home. I do all my mixing and stuff on my headphones. So,
Awesome.
and I just check in my car and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the last thing that we put on our list here is room treatment. So room treatment is essentially your way of creating a more sound friendly or recording friendly environment. You can get different types of treatment that essentially can catch over responsive echo or bass or things like that, and give you kind of a more controlled sound in your environment. Also, depending on the setting you're working in, they can be really nice for creating a more isolated environment too, to just kind of protect the privacy of that space. So it's something nice to consider.
Yeah.
And you'd mentioned some pretty cool DIY methods of doing that, right?
Yeah, for sure. I would say I would agree with you. If you are fortunate that you have a space like at the old place we worked at, we had a space that was a recording space. So, it's in a hospital, it's by a hallway, people are still walking by, but we put treatment all on the walls. So the room was very dead,
Hmm.
but it was better that it was dead than noisy, echoey, weird things. But some things I would consider mostly if you're trying to eliminate noise in your recordings, or weird reflections, and those are things that like you won't notice them at first, but once you start noticing them, you go, oh, this room does have a weird reflection, or oh, it is catching a lot of bass in that corner of the room. It's weird things that until you start to notice it, then you can't unnotice it. But some simple things to think of is these condenser mics. A lot of the condenser and dynamic mics are directional, so they're not picking up the sound from back here that much. They're like very much at all. They have like a pretty narrow band. So what you want to do is put treatment behind whoever is singing. So I've used moving blankets. I've used extra carpet. I've used anything that's super absorbent. If you have if you're at home and you have a mattress you can prop up on the wall, things like that. Recording in a closet with clothes all around you, things like that. If you're
Hmm.
trying to get the sound of a classical guitar, but you're in a hospital, right? Like bring some clothes or bring, some blankets. Um, from the last time we moved, we have several moving blankets. So those have been super handy. I can literally just screw them to the wall of my house or drape them on, music stands or whatever. So I would definitely say that. The other thing I would say is like, before you hit record, just like listen. Right now I can hear my computer is working hard. It's uh, turning air conditioning off. Uh, that's a huge one. If you're in your facility, you might not have control over that. So maybe just being mindful of where the vent is and maybe being at an opposite side of the vent. Also, if you can, like in the hospital, I realized there were several things like, can we unplug this refrigerator for a couple of minutes? Can we unplug things for a couple of minutes that's safe? Um, but also like if you're doing a clinical recording and there's, a monitor beeping or whatever, like humanistically, that is capturing the sound of what their life is right now. So there's something to be said about not polishing things as well. not trying to hide and mask those things. So just keep that in mind, because that could be powerful to have, beep, 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 or whatever, the infusion's over or whatever the issue is. So,
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of that myself. I was thinking about that as you were saying it, and I think that for myself, I like to get to the point where even recording becomes the creative process. And so sometimes you are capturing those sounds and you're hearing back to it, and maybe that's what's inspiring like the next
mm,
idea, right? Or kind of wanting to work with and shape that. I
mm,
really love that kind of like environmental music therapy type vibe where it's like we're playing with the environment, not trying to get away from it,
yeah,
and recontextualizing it in that way. Yeah.
for sure. One of these days, I'm going to do my like sampling. I'm going to sample a bunch of sounds from the NICU just to show nurses what they're putting these babies through.